Just out of curiosity, can you not hear this when I
do this, when I try to do the Bane Cup voice, does that not come through?
No, it does.
Okay. You just didn't think it was funny.
Well, earlier I was still like I said, my computer was slow and it was still ringing a little bit.
A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 43. I'm your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hi.
How's it going?
I'm all right.
You know, I know this is going to sound weird. I just want to jump right into a brief introduction of the show. I always realize we jump right into things, and I always wonder if somebody just stumbles across the show if they really know what this show is. And you have,
That's right.
You've
Does anyone really know what this show is, Robert?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll tell you what I'm attempting.
Yeah.
Attempting Talking Bird, the special edition, is a Star Wars podcast where we talk about Star Wars, news and views, in a conversational style. Not, it's a give and a take. It's a back and forth. It's a little bit of this. It's a little bit of that. There, I've said it. I think people understand our mission statement. Now we can get in. So you're doing all right, right?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing well. I've had a lot of talks, research presentations that I've attended the last several days. So my head's full of knowledge. But I'm ready to translate that knowledge about other things into talking about Star Wars.
Excellent. Well, we have a lot to talk about this week.
We do.
This is going to be kind of a newsy reviewsy kind of show.
Mm-hmm.
So, like the big thing going on right now, not news-wise, but as far as product or story, is the release of not Christine Golden. Who wrote?
Claudia Gray.
Sorry. Claudia Gray.
Yeah.
Claudia Gray's Bloodline, which is a quote solo Princess Leia adventure that is considered canon. We're both in the process of reading it. John finished it last night. I'm still reading it. We just decided that we were probably going to do all next week about it. So
there's a lot to talk about it. So we wanted to give it its own show.
Yeah, it's going to get its own thing. I will just say. My brief mini review, although I'm only about halfway through, is so far so good. I'm impressed. They've stepped up their game a little bit, and I'll leave it at that. And hopefully it'll stick the landing.
It'll entice you to tune in again next week,
or maybe even give you guys some time to run over to talkingbird.com/Amazon and either buy a copy of it for your Kindle, for your physical copy or Audible copy or whatever, and follow along with us next week. It's not a super long book.
And I should say that's talkingbirdcast.com. Is that?
Yeah, geez, sorry.
No,
I gotta sell the product. Yeah,
it's a new website, so we're still adjusting to the name.
Yeah, we're doing some tweaks and stuff like that. I got some feedback that in as much of a guy who doesn't know a lot about web design and is beholden to a very good friend, Erica, who I don't know how much of her info she wants on the show, but she's a good friend of the show and an all-around good egg has helped me out immensely because I know a lot of things in this world, and making websites is not one of them. So without her, we would probably be, we'd be nowhere on that side. But also there's, I would say go over there and poke around a little bit. There's not a lot of, a lot of it is just social media redirects and things like that. I did actually take the time and write a review of this new documentary that has come out recently called Elstree 1976. And maybe I'll talk a little bit about that later, but, I think we should just get right into it.
Yeah. So we'll start with some movie news. The biggest news related to Star Wars from this past week is that we have officially a new youngish Han Solo. Alden Ehrenreich officially has the part. For months and months there were these talks of like, well, they have a short list of 5 to 6 actors. Well, now they've winnowed it down to 3, and so now it's down to 1, Alden Ehrenreich, who most recently, I guess, was in Hail Caesar, the Coen Brothers film.
Yeah, he had a pretty big part, apparently.
Yeah, and he was... I've talked about it, we've talked about him a little bit on the show before. I think he's really good in Hail Caesar. He's very charismatic in that movie. When he has to be, he can play the comic, stuff pretty well. So yeah, I think it's a pretty solid choice myself.
Yeah,
and I should say too, I don't really know who else is. Since I don't go to the movies a lot, I don't really know what the universe of youngish male actors is out there. But of all the names that they had under consideration, I thought that Ehrenreich was probably the best, or at least the one whose work I enjoyed the most, and so that's why I think it was a good call.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, a lot of the kind of the fan community's anxiety, I think, about this film is pretty much the maybe the pedigree of the directors. Although I think considering that they've been able to do a lot of different things, I'm not as concerned as some maybe. I think most of it comes down to the casting, and I think maybe in the anxiety comes with people's kind of idea of like, well, they has to look like Harrison Ford. He has to look like Harrison Ford. And I don't believe that. I think that, in the past, there's been, people have played characters of Harrison Ford in other things, say like Sean Patrick Flannery played a young Indiana Jones. Obviously River Phoenix played a young Indiana Jones. These kind of things. It's like, I think, and I don't know because I haven't seen Hail Caesar, I think that it's more incumbent on them, other than a vague physical similarity, is that you get the acting style, that kind of, the way they play it is probably more important though, because they can always do things with hair and makeup and stuff. It's amazing how, a little sculpting of an eyebrow or, a little bit of, darkening of the under the eyes or whatever, can get you there. It's like, there was one actor who's I guess his real thing is that he's known as being kind of a really great impressionist who he can do like a spot on Robin Williams, and and his whole thing is, and I forget his name, but he can kind of hold his face a certain way. He looks like a young Harrison Ford, and people were really pushing for this guy. And he even actually played a young Harrison Ford in the in this what was it called, The Age of Adeline. But I don't even know. I don't even know if he may have had a 1 or 2 line, and I know a lot of people were pushing for that. But to kind of that's great in small doses. But I think really to do this right, you're going to have someone that kind of sets themselves apart and almost kind of takes the reins. Yeah. So it's, because Harrison Ford's not going to play it anymore, and
right. And
it wouldn't make sense otherwise.
Yeah. And I agree with you that, and you didn't put it in quite this way, but this is, I think, gets at what you were talking about, which is, you don't want someone who's basically just going to mimic Han Solo or mimic Harrison Ford, right? Because then it's always going to be like, well, how accurately how accurately is he mimicking Harrison Ford?
Right.
And for the same reason, you were talking about, well, there are ways that they can sort of alter his appearance a little bit to make him look a little bit more like maybe a young Harrison Ford. And I also hope they don't spend too much time and money on that aspect of it either. Because again, then you get almost in this kind of like uncanny valley of like, well, he looks sort of like him, but there's something slightly off because it's not the same person. And right, it gets distracting. And, you know, when you think about comedians or amateur comedians or just people who do impressions and they do, you know, their Jack Nicholson or their De Niro or whatever, like, I think in large part, that's kind of the issue is almost like they're trying too hard to like get either the facial expressions right or the voice right or something. And, you know, for me, it'll be more about maybe the mannerisms and the cadence and the timing that Ehrenreich brings to it, where, you know, that kind of captures more of the essence of the Han Solo character for me. And, you know, and maybe, you know, that the way he walks or something, but, you know, in terms of physical characteristics, but, you know, I'm not really going to care that much about how much Ehrenreich looks like a young Harrison Ford might have looked, and or sounds like him, because to me that's just going to be too distracting. And like you said, you know, he needs to, you know, yes, he does need to live up to kind of Harrison Ford's iconic performance in that role, but he also needs to do something to kind of set himself apart a little bit and show like, look, this isn't Harrison Ford doing it, this is me doing it, and take some kind of ownership over some aspect of that character. And so, yeah, I have a feeling that the people involved are sort of cognizant of all that and will go in that direction. But in terms of like what fans might expect, or, you know, maybe even, like I said, I'm a little worried that they might spend too much time on like the makeup, you know, oh, let's try to make him look as much like Harrison Ford as possible. That stuff doesn't matter as much to me.
Yeah. I think it's like, you know, this kind of tapestry of, it's not like a situation where, you know, an actor is stepping into an iconic role, like, you know, someone doing a, you know, a Hamlet or a Dracula, or a Huckleberry Finn, where it's like all of a sudden it's like, well, no, this is my interpretation. He's actually going to have to kind of, you know, add his piece to almost like a linear idea of the character. And and one of the things I've kind of noticed in this kind of going to the Force Awakens, in this kind of rare instance where we have an actor returning to a role after 30 years, that in a lot of ways, his depiction of you know, Harrison Ford's depiction of Han Solo in The Force Awakens is actually over more viewings has become quite interesting. I'm not going to say nuanced, even though there is a lot of emotional keystones. It's the idea that, you know, we're seeing Han Solo in a way that's quite different than we ever saw him in those previous 3 movies. It was like this idea that, you know, when Han Solo was introduced in A New Hope, he's already having a pretty weird day anyway, from what we can understand. He knows he owes somebody money. He's generally kind of running afoul of people. He's kind of, I think, but then he makes this fateful decision, and it kind of sets his life off into a path. And even though in Empire he goes, hey, I got to get out of it. I got to stop doing this. I got to go back to my old thing. And it doesn't quite work. And then, of course, by the time Jedi, the character has changed to the point where he's totally committed to this idea, or he's at least wanting to follow the woman he loves around, and he's willing to commit to that idea. So when we see him in The Force Awakens, it's very interesting to me that this is kind of when he picks up the Falcon, it's like we're seeing him in his natural habitat. This was a version of Han Solo that we never saw, because he was, he went back to the only thing he knew how to do or whatever. So it's kind of interesting that he's actually able to nuance it, and it'll be interesting to see what Alden Ehrenreich has to kind of add to that. It's like, well, we're going to see, you know, maybe the choices that, you know, create the Han Solo that we see in A New Hope or whatever. We're not going to be seeing him being a rebel, or, you know, it's a very different.
He's going to be either a smuggler or just sort of a general scoundrel, right? Like,
or even like says he's going to be. How old is Ehrenreich anyway? Is he like 25 or something like that?
Yeah, that's probably a good
I think
guess.
You know, he's probably a fuck up. You know, that's the thing. Right. I mean, even Harrison Ford, the actor, didn't become Harrison Ford until Star Wars. And I'm not knocking his earlier work, but if you like look at him in, say, The Conversation, or he has a brief, I don't know how the time frame, he plays Bob Falfa, obviously in American Graffiti. And then
there was sort of a reason that he was just kind of hanging around the studio as a carpenter or whatever.
Yeah, it's like almost like they had to kind of he had to find the right role that he could kind of show what he had, and two, it's like the movie industry kind of had to catch up to that kind of, there was the naturalistic kind of acting that went all the way back to like Brando, and I forget who he studied with, and Paul Newman and those kind of people. And he was kind of that style, but he also had his foot kind of firmly in the idea of, with the classic movie star. I just think it took a lot of time for people to warm up to that. And so that's why he was like 35 when he finally became, found where he needed to be as an actor. Right. So, I mean, I guess I don't know really what my point on it. I will say this. It just reminds me of one thing, going back to this idea of the tapestry of Han Solo, and something that I made a note to myself is, watching The Force Awakens, pardon me, it makes me realize that how much it personally bugs me that when we see the Millennium Falcon, to realize that Han Solo has not had the Millennium Falcon for a long time, and not to like spoil the book Bloodline. It's referenced in the book too, and then you go, how long has he not had this thing? Right. It kind of bugs. Not that this is not a criticism of the storytelling. It's just my own personal reaction to it. Every time I see that, I was like, oh my God, how long has he not had that ship? I almost realized it's like without that ship, it's almost like he's sort of just a guy. He's just a guy. It's like that ship is a character, and to realize that they were jumping around in different ships and trying on stuff, it's just, I don't know. It's I'm not saying that they should have changed anything. I'm just saying it's actually an interesting story beat. It adds a little bit of, at least for my thing, a little bit of gravitas, because I'm just like, geez, he doesn't have the ship? Anyway, that's just kind of a sidestep there. But yeah, I honestly, like I said, my opinion on this Han Solo movie is that I'm willing to go with it. I'm willing to, just for the sake of like, yeah, there's part of me that as a fan that's like, why are we telling this story? It's completely theirs to mess up or something if they don't stick it right, But I've decided to be positive about it and think that it's going to be good until I'm given evidence otherwise. And so far, casting wise, I think they're going in a right direction. Yeah. Yeah. I think so too. And so I'm back to being sort of tentatively enthusiastic, or at least looking forward to optimistic. Oh, sorry about that. Sorry. Something just fell off my desk. Tentatively optimistic about this film, whereas, as they're going through the casting process, it was more about like, well, it'll depend on who they hire, and I don't know, and what's it going to be about, and so now that we have a Han Solo now, it's like, all right, I'm hopeful again. I'm swinging back around to being hopeful. Yeah, I mean, I think and I don't even know why I get this sense. Maybe it's because the guys that are directing it have a comedy background. Yeah, is that maybe this is going to be fun. Yeah, it's like movies can be fun sometimes. They don't all have to be dour and dark and like, oh, this is the pivotal moment of his life kind of thing. It might just be like a story. I don't know. I don't really know how they are, until Rogue One comes out, I don't really know exactly what Lucasfilm's kind of narrative push for these are, but maybe it might just be fun. But speaking of casting, yes. One of the other big names that have been bandied about in the rumor mill was Tom Hardy, that he was going to be in Episode 8. Now, I don't know how this rumor started, but initially it was that like he wants to be Boba Fett. He was going to be Boba Fett, and and this rumor, I mean, it was essentially just that. If you read it, the rumor was based on the fact that like, well, lots of fans would like to see it.
And it was like, okay. And we got Akbar and Nine Numb in episode 7, so maybe we'll get Boba Fett at episode 8. Like, okay. And that was sort of it for that one.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying I'm not against the idea of bringing Boba Fett back. I mean, I think even Lucas kind of had inferred that, like, oh no, I've always considered that he survived that Sarlacc pit or whatever. But I honestly, if Boba Fett's going to show up, he's probably going to show up in that Han Solo movie, in my opinion, unless there's a huge subplot with bounty hunters and the original ESB bounty hunters in Rogue One. I mean, it's kind of funny because it's like, well, you could stick it in the Han Solo movie, or you could stick it over here, or you can stick it up your, whatever.
Yeah, I could tell Lucasfilm where to stick it if they really
exactly. This idea that people are in love with this idea of and I think it came. Gosh, I think it's this dude named Paul. Maybe it was Paul Bateman. He's one of these guys who's always on Rebel Force Radio. I think he's an artist. He's worked. I think he worked intimately with Ralph McQuarrie. He kind of brought up this kind of backdoor way of doing Boba Fett. He was the first one to kind of bring this up, is this idea of that, like, it's like the costume makes you Boba Fett, and different people will play Boba Fett. Like, oh, we could reboot it by, we'll have Tamora Morrison, all bloodied and stuff like that. And then somebody else takes on the armor and takes on. That's why Boba Fett is such a mythical character, because different people have been Boba Fett over the years and nobody quite knows. But I mean, they've set it up a little bit in the aftermath. There was some Mandalorian style armor being sold that had,
and even in the EU, they set it up so that there was the Boba Fett who did survive the Sarlacc pit, but then at some point, some other guy showed up wearing Mandalorian armor and calling himself Boba Fett, but it's not really who it was. I mean, that was like a continuity issue. Yeah, that arose. I think after the movies came out, but the prequels, I mean, but the idea has been floating out there for a bit.
Yeah, I mean, I just love that's the one disappointment I have about, say, like the Clone Wars and stuff. I felt like they over-explained the Mandalorians, and now we have a Mandalorian on Rebels, and it's like now we basically have like a little Boba Fett running around in a costume, and it's like I do like the idea of it being a more mysterious thing, but I also like the idea that it's tied to this unaltered clone of Jango Fett. But I know that anytime one of these things are pushed forward, they're very cautious about how far they want to dip into the prequel era, and I understand, because there's a lot of mainstream kind of thumbs down viewpoint of that. I mean, and they're not afraid to throw in like clones and references to clones and the balance of the Force, but to bring that whole thing back where it's like, like, say, is there any chance that we're going to see maybe Jimmy Smith show up in Rogue One or something like that? It's like, probably not. But are they going to bring Darth Vader? Absolutely. It's like they're very careful about when they want to dip back into prequel era stuff. So anyway, this thing about Tom Hardy, well, it turned out to be BS, of course, and then,
right. So that one was very thin rumor.
And so but
then a real thing happened.
Yeah, and this will be spoiler territory, but I don't really believe it's considered a spoiler because it's just a cameo. And that he's going to be doing essentially...
Who knows, maybe the scene will get cut anyway.
Right. He's essentially doing a Daniel Craig situation where he is playing a stormtrooper in armor. Which, that is the new... I don't even know what you would call it. That's the new thing for, like, hey, here's the guy that, produced 3 Radiohead albums. Let's put him in an outfit. It's that kind of thing. Any dude who's like a certain... Or lady or whatever. I haven't actually heard about any... women being kind of...
No, but they have women stormtroopers.
They have women stormtroopers.
So maybe we'll start hearing a little more.
Let's throw, Kate Winslet's is the right age to have been a Star Wars kid. Let's throw her in a costume. I don't know if she's really into cameos and things like that. I mean, and at one time she was bandied about as being, back when Attack of the Clones was just a glimmer in George Lucas's eye. There was a rumor that she was going to show up as a young Mon Mothma.
Mm-hmm.
Which never came to pass. But
we're getting a young Mon Mothma in the Rogue One now.
Right, which we are, like I said, it's like she was the same one that had filmed her scenes that were eventually deleted. So what's her last name? Genevieve, and it's not Rice. It's
O'Reilly.
O'Reilly.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Right, but yeah, so all of these things, you hear a rumor and they're like part of it's sort of true, and then a lot of it is like leaping to conclusions.
I mean, I like Tom Hardy, but it's kind of like, when he shows up on screen, you're like, oh, it's Tom Hardy. It's kind of, he's not one of those guys that can kind of, guys, and I don't think he's on the level of like a DiCaprio level of a movie star, but it's like they have those,
he's been in a lot of movies the last couple of years.
Yeah.
So he's getting around.
But that one of the worst things that you can do in a Star Wars movie is to kind of throw somebody in there who's like a name, a face, like a well-known face, and not have it be like a substantial role where they can show that, like, well, I'm not so-and-so, I'm this character.
A substantial face as a cameo.
Yeah, it's like Jimmy Smits is kind of a casting coup. Now, if Jimmy Smits just showed up as a guy, like, I have a message, and then he never saw him again, it would be like, wow, that was kind of stunty. But no, he had a real role, and he was, even though it was kind of brief, he didn't get to have a whole arc or anything, but he wasn't just a stunt casting.
Right.
Actually, now that we say, now that I talk about a female Stormtrooper.
Yeah, speaking of casting rumors.
Why don't Cate Blanchett?
Right. Expressed interest in being in a Star Wars.
A Star Wars.
And basically that's how it was put. So this was her talking to the Sun, maybe, or an Irish newspaper, because I think she might be in Ireland filming something. And of course, episode 8 is back in Ireland filming. And so she told this Irish newspaper that she would love to film in Ireland, or I guess she's not filming there now, but she said that she would, I'd love to film in Ireland. And specifically, she said she'd like to film on Skellig Michael, but, Star Wars, that's probably the only time that's going to happen. And then she said, Star Wars looks fun. I would like to do one. And then she talked about how J.J. Abrams is a gifted creator, as if that was a reason that she wanted to do a Star Wars movie. So either this is an old interview, or maybe she just doesn't know that J.J. Abrams isn't really involved anymore. She just doesn't pay that much attention.
This isn't really I'm not trying to ding.
This isn't a rumor. It's so much of like, Cate Blanchett expressed interest that in the future.
Hey, that's how Samuel L. Jackson got a role.
That's true.
But, the thing is that and this is not a dig on Cate Blanchett, but I think I talked a couple episodes back how I was like, I just kind of, over a short period, watched huge amounts of behind the scenes stuff about the Peter Jackson's Hobbit trilogy, which she was a part of. And to be perfectly honest, she was very much like this, like, I'd love to come back and play this, and I never wanted to go home, and this is my fun time. And no, I'm not denying that that's what she says, but sometimes I think that's like EPK, electronic press kit talk that actors do sometimes. And they, it's like they have to do, 20 interviews in a week or media outlets. And so they have to come up with something interesting. Now, I'm not denying that she wants to do this. And I think it would be, if there's a role for her, I think it would work perfectly.
It could work.
She's a great actress. I would say,
and she certainly has experience in these kind of science fiction fantasy films.
Yeah, she knows how to look at a painted tennis ball. It's not going to be
right.
I will say that her turn in Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skull, I was like, I don't know. It was a pretty broad performance of playing. I think she was playing a Ukrainian, but a Soviet at the time. But that movie was just corny. All the performances were kind of out of whack. I don't know what was up with that. So, that might not even have been her fault. She might have had a totally different performance that got changed in post script or whatever. But yeah, the indications that she's like, I'd love to work with J.J. Abrams. It's like, Lucasfilm did put him forth.
Right. He's like a producer on the episode 8. But.
Right. But he produces everything.
Yeah.
Like, I honestly, like, I've got about a 25 to 30 5% chance every time I watch something that J.J. Abrams is producing it. I think I'm just about ready to finish up that Hulu James Franco 12/22/63. I think he was a producer on that. And it's like, I don't really know what that means. I don't know if that means he gives guidance, or he's like, he's there as a name, and then if they get into trouble, he comes in and gives them his opinion or whatever. He's producing so many things. I don't know exactly how much his creative involvement in episode 8 is. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's Rian Johnson's show. Although, Rian Johnson is pretty active on Twitter, and even, I think he's maybe Instagram. He's not particularly forthcoming with, he's not like a J.J. Abrams where, he was constantly engaged with like on a video, those, and maybe J.J. didn't really talk a lot about it during filming. And maybe I'm thinking of his run for promotional stuff later on when he would start doing the, Force for Change and stuff like that. It's like, that's like Rian Johnson hasn't appeared in the Force for Change stuff. It's mostly been Kathy Kennedy. So maybe that's just kind of thing like, hey, I'm a director. I'm not, I'm not going to be a personality for
I'm sure he'll be happy, maybe once the movie is done and, either before it gets released or after it gets released. I'm sure, either it's in his contract or he'll feel like, okay, I'll do one thing, I'll do something like that for y'all. But he's not going to be as sort of identifiable or as visible and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of, I don't know. I've been hearing all these rumors and stuff about like these positionings about, and maybe they're not rumors. It's just speculation. It's like I read like this. I have the account for the show, and I'm constantly reading the Twitter before showtime just to kind of catch the flow of the wind, so to speak. And somebody, and I apologize for not making a note of who it was, had kind of posited this theory that Bob Iger at Disney. It's well known he's actually supposed to retire within the next 18 months. Mm-hmm. And he had this is all kind of boring inside baseball stuff. There was but I was reading this article about who was going to be the heir apparent to take over for him was this young executive that has since then has been summarily just fired. They don't even know why. It was a big thing in Variety. It was like he'd actually saved Bob Iger's life at a restaurant by giving him the Heimlich. He was
right,
and then all of a sudden he's out. So he was supposed to be running Disney. Well, apparently there's kind of like this weird power vacuum, so they don't know who's going to be running Disney after Bob Iger steps down. Yeah. And the rumor is that maybe that Kathy Kennedy might step up into that role because she's obviously had an incredible success with this franchise, and I can't think of any big missteps that they've done so far, since they've kind of converted over to Disney. She's obviously a talented manager and creative person. So, it makes sense. I don't know if it's true. And the thing that makes me kind of go, I don't know if this is going to happen, is that they were like, oh, they're going to bring Kevin Feige over from Marvel to kind of be the Lucasfilm, which I don't know about that. I mean, I don't know if that even sounds realistic. That's the kind of like, I think that was even the tweeter had kind of admitted that was pie in the sky. I mean, he's a Marvel dude through and through, and I know that he's gone up through decades of like those bad Marvel movies from the aughts and stuff. He was involved with those and fought to maintain a more consistent control over the Marvel movie. So I don't know. That seems, I might be just completely speculating, but
mm-hmm. And so if Cate Blanchett were to join the Star Wars, I was going to say series, but the Star Wars collection of properties, what do you think? Do you think she would be better as a hero, as a villain, something else like a bounty hunter, or a smuggler? Like, where do you see her fitting in?
I would want her to be a bad guy. Just because I think it would be cool.
Hmm.
We've got a ton of, we've almost got, that's like the issue with this new Star Wars thing we almost have too many good guys. We've got Rey, we got Finn, we got Poe Dameron, we've got all these, they got that whole room of people in the things. And it's like, we had Phasma, who I like, but the use of her was kind of disappointing. And maybe that might be a function of, she's wearing this armor, looks great on screen, but it doesn't really give her much movement, and she can't arc with the face.
Yeah, I would say, I don't know if it's so much like the volume of here good guys to bad guys that we have now within The Force Awakens, but it's just that the heroes are so much more compelling, I think. In part because of what you say, like with Phasma, like there's really not that much to that part, and then also, she's just kind of hidden behind that uniform that's kind of restricting. But even, Kylo Ren, I think is probably the most compelling of the villains that came out of The Force Awakens. But Hux, I don't think Hux is that compelling, and I haven't seen, the times that I check in on Star Wars Twitter, like, people aren't really talking about Hux that much. There's not like a fake Twitter account for, angry Hux or
emo Hux
or and then Snoke, certainly his identity is capturing a lot of people's imagination, but beyond that, there's not really that much to the character, and I don't think that we just don't know enough about either Hux or Snoke at this point to really find them all that compelling. Again, beyond like, okay, who is, how did Snoke get to the position? Where is he? Like, until we find all that out, then, there's really not much to compel you about that character. And so, whereas, we were given, sort of a sketch of Finn's backstory and who he is as a character. We were given Rey's backstory a little bit. Poe Dameron, not much of one, but, Oscar Isaac is charismatic as all hell in that movie. And then on top of that, you had Han Solo and Leia and so yeah, I think it's, we're kind of in need of some more compelling, villains at this point. Maybe Benicio del Toro will be one. Who knows?
I forget about Benicio del
Toro.
Toro.
I just remembered it just now, and that's why I said it, because I had to remind myself.
Yeah, sorry, Kate. And also, it's probably too late to script her into episode 8 anyway.
Oh, yeah, no. I and probably even 9 at this point. Maybe not 9. But.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the kind of... Yeah, I don't even know why we need her. We got Benicio. I mean, she would be great as a counterpoint to Hux, maybe.
Yeah,
but
I mean, at this point, though, Phasma is really the only female villain in any of them, and so if they wanted to bring more female villains in, I think Cate Blanchett, sure, give her a call.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Have you ever heard any? I mean, I know Benicio kind of. He wasn't as bad as Mads Mikkelsen, kind of letting the cat out of the bag about his character, but didn't he kind of intimate? He goes, I think he kind of did oh gosh, what's his name now? The Kylo Ren kind of thing, where he kind of goes, well, I don't like to say whether he's a good or bad guy, because that's all just his own. That's
right.
That's your interpretation, and I think that's kind of what Benicio had said about his character. So, let's hope that's a payoff, because, like I said, I think I said when we talked about him before, it's like he did a really great turn in Sicario. I thought he was terribly underutilized in Guardians of the Galaxy. He's a real powerhouse, so it'll be interesting to see how they use him. Because, like I said, I think a lot of people were underwhelmed by Hux. I wasn't as much. I thought Donald Gleason had a subtlety to it, and maybe subtlety doesn't work in Star Wars movie. He did a lot of, like, I say it a lot, is face acting or whatever.
Yeah.
He's got a lot in the eyes.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like, I think maybe it might have been a choice in cinematography, even, that the way he was filmed, he he's not a short man, I guess. He's quite tall. I think he's like 6'2" or 6'3" or something like that. Mm-hmm. And they kind of film at an angle. He looks very small amongst everyone else. So he looks like he's always, in the way they costume him, and for every indication, his costuming doesn't change for this, because Mark Hamill made a joke. He talked to Oxford, I think it was, recently. Like 2 months ago, he gave like an hour talk, and somebody had asked him about secrecy on set, and he said something that he had run to Donald Gleason and said, you know, he was wearing a cloak over him, and somebody was thing, and he goes, it's like, oh, you know, secrecy. And then they got to a place where the cloak got taken away, and he's like, wait a second, you're wearing the same outfit you wore in the last movie. Why are they being so secretive? Right. So, you know, I don't know. Yeah. It'll be interesting. Like, I am kind of chomping at the bit for some better villains. Honestly, because the whole conflicted aspect of Kylo Ren, I don't know if, you know, and Adam Driver did some really cool stuff at the end. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he had a lot of, it's kind of the same problem of, you know, Darth Vader. It's like, there's not a lot you can do in these costumes, you know. Right. A lot of it is, you know, we don't really start to understand Kylo Ren until that mask comes off. Although I think the mask, like, I'm actually in the camp where I think the mask comes off a little too early, but that's just,
I do too, actually.
It's like, yeah, it would have been such a reveal if it had come off on that plank. Mm-hmm. Just the fact that they, in some ways, when that reveal, like, you know, it's almost like they have like the same nose, and it's like, kind of thing. Yeah. And they really waste. I understand that you want to get your characters on, and you want to have that. They thought emotionally that the actor needed to show his face or whatever. I honestly think it was a misstep, way more than, you know, Chewbacca not hugging Princess Leia.
Right.
Oh, and I had one other thing. I was talking about Rian Johnson, and there's a quote on Twitter that I found, and I didn't tell you about this ahead of time, but it'll kind of dovetail into the next topic.
Hit me.
So this is from May 8th, and Rian Johnson says, realized in all 3 movies I've made, I had a strong, definite idea while writing them of what song they'd end with. And in all 3, they didn't. Which is kind of interesting to realize, like, maybe he's just kind of tweaking the nose of nerds right now, of them going like, is this not going to end with the same kind of... the same kind of theme, the denouement.
So is this one of those 3 films that he's talking about, or?
Well, no,
because he made Brick and Looper,
and the brothers.
Oh yeah.
With Adam Brody.
Yeah.
You guys look it up. I'm not doing all your homework for you. Anyway, so yeah, Brothers Bloom, but I honestly think he's either tweaking people, trying to make them nervous, and saying, because like we said, all the rumors are like, you know, Lawrence Kasdan says that, you know, he's got that weird movie. He's doing with the weird script, and Oscar Isaac is saying, like, we're practically making an independent film the way this is being put together, which makes me, it's like, oh man, they're maybe that's their, you know, they're kind of going into performance this time around. That's going to be the you know, it's almost going to trump special effects in a weird way, which would be kind of a Rian Johnson thing. If you think of Looper, it's like technology in Looper is very parsed out in strange ways. It's like, okay, yeah, it's the future, but it's the future you could conceivably see. You know, it's like that thing, like, oh yeah, you know, in 15 years there'll be drones everywhere, and there'll be some new weird drug that people poke their eyes with. It's not, and everybody will walk around with these weird guns or whatever, you know. It's well, maybe that's a stretch, but you know, I don't know, it kind of makes me think, it's like, you know, what does he mean that we're not going to use the theme? Is it not going to end the same way? I mean, how could he's not even half done filming.
Yeah, I mean, I would interpret it a slightly different way, and I think for me, it speaks to 2 things. One, that he does think, you know, that the music is important to him. It's an important part of, you know, even while he's writing the film, he's thinking, okay, not just what is the ending going to be, but like, you know, what's the song that we're going to go out on, and that song is going to help, reinforce, whatever the ending is, or, something like that. So he does keep that aspect of it in mind as he's writing the film. But then I think he may have just been talking about, but he may have been talking about, the fact that these things change, and that, you might have one thing in mind as you're writing the film, and then you get to the set, or you get to a later draft of the film and you realize, okay, that's not working. We need to rethink this. And so I think it's speaking a little bit to his flexibility in that way, which honestly is, different from George Lucas, where, if George Lucas took a second pass or a third pass at his drafts, for the prequels, especially, like that would be a little surprising to me. Some of that stuff wasn't even written until right before he shot it. And
some of it wasn't even written until it was in editing.
Right. And so, yeah, George Lucas would say, oh yeah, why don't we put a sequence in this droid factory in, so his ideas can change a little bit there, but the idea that, okay, well, that he gets to the set and sees like, okay, well, this isn't working, let's try something else. That's not really how he operates, right? He has an idea and then he translates it on the set, and whether that idea is working on the set or not, he just thinks, well, I'll just fix it later, and then tries to fix it later rather than coming up with a slightly different idea. And I don't think Rian Johnson, was making that direct comparison to George Lucas, but that would be the comparison I would make. And it could be that, we won't get the, the rousing closing theme, the iris in, and then,
right,
or whatever. And to that point, John Williams was recently conducting the Philadelphia Orchestra. And I assume the program, I don't know if he was conducting the entire time or if they brought him out to conduct a few pieces. But I think he made some comment to the audience that was quoted that, and there's some dispute over what he actually said. So one version is that he said, quote, I told the producers I wasn't sure if I wanted to do the next one, but that I didn't want anyone else doing it either. The alternate version is that he was about to conduct Rey's theme, and he said something along the lines of, I told the producers I wasn't sure if I wanted to do the next one, but I love the character of Rey so much that I didn't want anyone else writing for her either. And so if it's specifically about Rey or just about Star Wars generally, right. So he was making a joke, right, about his own kind of like ego and his own ownership over Star Wars. But I keep going back to this. I'm still so nervous about, both Rogue One, which we know is going to have someone other than John Williams scoring it. But then, like, what happens when he stops writing Star Wars music? What's going to happen? What are the directors going to decide to do with it? Because then it's kind of open for whatever the directors want to do. If they want to have their composer try to sound as much like John Williams as possible, or not.
Yeah.
So so maybe Rian Johnson was tweaking fans,
and that's kind of what I'm like. I think it's kind of their way of having fun about. If they don't say anything specific, or they say like, oh, I think if Star Wars has to survive in the 21st century, we're going to have to let go of a lot of our preconceptions about it. I don't think he was saying anything like that. So I think, it's more of a tweak to the nose. And I honestly think John Williams is probably still kind of considering, and it's probably not of a thing of like, do I love Star Wars or not? It's taking on projects. I'm in my 80s, and like I said, I don't want to go off on a whole nother discussion of the soundtrack. I'll be honest, it's my least favorite Star Wars soundtrack. It's kind of I'm kind of sad.
Even less so than like episode 2 or
well, maybe episode 2 episode 2 would probably be still the worst, because honestly episode 2
episode 2 is kind of its own animal.
It's like that was the, like I say every week, it's like when I'm getting ready, going over my notes, collecting news, reading up on stuff, it's like I like to put a Star Wars movie on the night before the show. And I just kind of like, well, I've been watching The Force Awakens too much. So I say, oh, okay, let's put on Attack of the Clones. And it goes on in the background, and I don't always finish it.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, what a piece of crap that movie is. God, and I always feel like I'm the guy.
It's a slog.
Like I need to be a prequel defender, and I'm not. And I think if you listen to the show, we're not one of those kind of people that get our backs up about people like bagging on the prequels or whatever. It's like your opinion is just as valid, but I've spent a lot more time thinking about it, and I also admit that my opinion will change. I'm like, oh, I understand what he's doing, and this time I watched it, and I'm like, God, this is terrible. This is just so bad. There's nothing happening. I don't care. Mm-hmm. It's like there's nothing that's going to, like, at least with some of the other movies, like you can, like, your eyes will catch up and you go, oh, the pod race. I got to watch the pod race, or I'm going to watch Darth Maul fight, or in the originals, of course, it's like it's always hard for me to tear my eyes away. And of course, The Force Awakens, which, having now seen it a bunch more times because it's on home video, it's infinitely watchable, even if the story is rather thin.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the problems with Attack of the Clones, is that the amount of story is what ruins it. It's like, dude, chill. You put way too much in. It's a mystery, and it's a malt shop, and it's and it's termites, and it's protestations of love. It's like, yeah, it didn't work. But I'm not.
I mean, for all of Lucas's strengths as an editor, or the fact that I think he sees himself as a director, but he sees his strength probably in the editing room, and he likes directing in the editing room. Boy, episode 2 really needs an editor. Yeah. Right. And so and about episode 7, I like the soundtrack. I think it's fine. I think the moments where it directly quotes, previous themes, I think are maybe a little obvious or a little heavy-handed. They're just right out there, and they kind of interrupt the rest of it, and then it goes back to kind of the original music. So like I said, I like it. There comes a point whenever I'm just listening to the soundtrack, I don't know, maybe 2/3 or so of the way in, once we get to Han and Leia, so I'm looking at the track titles, Han and Leia. So after Kylo Ren, this is in the movie, after Kylo Ren kind of kidnaps Rey and brings her to his ship or wherever he takes her. And then you get the March of the Resistance and the meeting with Snoke and, the Scherzo for X-Wings. Like that part, I feel like it just doesn't hit me in the same way that, kind of the big moments in the beginning, Rey meeting BB-8 and Finn meeting up with Poe and them escaping on the TIE fighter and Rey's theme and, like that, those big moments, and then the Jedi steps at the end, those kind of resonate with me musically a lot more. And there's a point in the score, I think, where it kind of gets a little muddled a little bit. And I think it's not that it's an intentional muddle. It's that, Williams is trying to kind of connect all of these things and he doesn't want to repeat himself. And so that means he has to avoid certain things, but at a certain point, someone will have to make the decision. Okay, do we want our non-John Williams composers to try to emulate John Williams in the way that, so many people in the industry already do anyway? Like, okay, do we get the, the maybe lesser known or still big name composers, but who kind of make their bones imitating John Williams? Or do we go in a completely different direction? And, maybe we go to the electronic score, the electronic music scores or a more minimal style or a slightly different stylistic. Maybe we get yeah, maybe we get like a minimalist score rather than this kind of neo-romantic thing, or, you know, those choices are going to have to be made at some point. And yeah, so I wonder how, you know, I'm sure people within Lucasfilm and involved in Star Wars are kind of aware of that. And
I bet you there's arguments, because I'm like, my reaction, which I don't know if the mic picked it up, is when you say electronic thing, I kind of went, ugh. Yeah. It's like, and I like that kind of stuff. I'm a big fan I'm a big fan of like Daft Punk's Tron Legacy soundtrack. I used to collect, you know, movie soundtracks from like THX or Logan's Run and stuff like that. I'm not against that kind of stuff. I just think that like, it doesn't really work in a Star Wars setting. But, you know,
right.
I would also say that, you know, sometimes if they feel like, you know, if they're just doing it for the sake of mixing it up, that's a mistake. Now, if they think we have something really special here and it's going to necessitate a change, then you know, maybe I guess Lucasfilm has to take risks, because Star Wars can be, you know, 40 years in, it can be easily become very stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not.
So I think maybe I'm coming around a little bit. Maybe Rian Johnson is sort of hinting at like, yeah, you know, eventually this might be different, and you know, tweaking the fact that fans care so much about this stuff that, you know, they can go, oh, and then it turns out to be okay, and they're like, yay, you know. So maybe you're right. Maybe that was Rian Johnson's intention there.
Yeah, I'm trying to see, like, and honestly, I don't really, in my mind, I'm not like, I don't really think of Rian Johnson movies as like, oh yeah, the music was great, blah blah blah.
Yeah, I guess of his movies, I think I've only seen Brick. But if you asked me right now what the last song that plays in Brick is, I could not tell you.
Right, and basically Looper was, and I'm just looking it up, is this guy named Nathan Johnson, who looks like he's done some movies, and he's done some. He did Brothers Bloom, he did Don John stuff. So I don't really know much about him. It looks like he's done some video game stuff. But I don't know. I mean, maybe he might be a person who's, you know, he's in line. What is it? The Cinematic. He had a live touring project called the Cinematic Underground. He did Brick. He did the Brothers Bloom. So he's worked with him on everything. It makes me wonder if he'd at least be in consideration.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
any relation to Rian Johnson? Nathan?
Oh, geez. I never even thought about that. Doesn't say. I know that Rian Johnson actually is a musician of some. He's like he's kind of like he plays bluegrass or something like that. Mini biography. We will find out right here as he together
live.
Oh, it's his cousin.
Discover with us.
It's his cousin.
There you go.
That was worth it, guys.
It was. It was worth the wait.
It's worth the wait. So who knows? I mean, I honestly don't know if, you know, if he says it's, you know, if Oscar Isaac says, oh, it's more like an indie film, it's like, man, maybe his cousin's hanging out with a keyboard and he's like, you know, scoring in the corner, and just in case John Williams doesn't want a reprise, and he's like, I already got some ideas.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm nervous like you are. It's kind of, you know, Rogue One is the linchpin for this if it's going to work. Because if it doesn't, if everybody leaves walking out going, yeah, you know, I mean, I can complain all I want about, you know, the fact that I didn't enjoy the score to Force Awakens as much, and I'm not saying it's bad. My big nit that I pick is just the orchestration of that theme, which wasn't even, you know, just the recording style and the mix, which is, you know, the rest of it's totally appropriate. I mean, the Jedi Steps it's a great piece of music, and even Rey's theme is very beautiful. Although it is so evocative of Christmas, kind of, that
a little bit.
I keep on thinking like Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies, but that's my own hang-ups. But like you said, the Splot kind of, you know, and I'm reading a lot into a very brief exchange on a red carpet or whatever. is that, maybe for Desplat, this is more of just like, well, it's a gig. I'm known for a guy who can come in and score a movie in 2 weeks. And I don't know if they budget these Star Wars anthology movies at the same level as the episodes.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know.
So if we're thinking like this is probably a test for Lucasfilm, was like, hey, can we make a Star Wars movie for $95 million or $100 million, which I think if we were being honest, if you really got a chance to look at the books, I'm sure The Force Awakens cost about $200 million just for the negative, just to get to the negative. Mm-hmm. So it's like, well, if we do a Star Wars movie at half the price, and then we kind of, and not cheap out on the score, but we pick somebody who's like a workman like
right.
film person, is like, yeah, I'm not going
to what's the Coen Brothers guy, Carter Burwell?
Yeah, Carter Burwell, like a guy like that.
Where he's, I think he's won some awards, but
right, he's not a bad composer, but he doesn't go like.
He's also not the name on everyone's lips when they think about like, oh, who are the great film composers today?
Yeah, it's not like he's sitting on the set or well, I mean, I guess even Williams doesn't actually start scoring until there's a rough assembly of the movie. Right. But maybe the process is more of like, I don't know how much in the past you could tell John Williams, like, I don't like that, try something different. Whereas these kind of workman-like people are used to taking notes, right, and that they don't have as much skin in the game.
Right.
So, maybe if they're just going to go for a John Williams emulation, a feel, they can get away with using a more working, for lack of a better term, a working class composer.
Right.
I still think that they need to like dip in and go to Joel McNeely, who did the score for the now non-canon Shadows of the Empire project. I actually think that they use it. Some of it ends up in the game, which is now so old. I don't even. You couldn't even play it on any computer now. There's some really good pieces in there, some really great action stuff that he does. And I looked him up the other day. He does score film.
Mm-hmm. And he's been working with Disney for at least the last, it looks like, I don't know, 12, 15 years. So they've got his number, certainly.
Yeah, I'm only really familiar with the Shadow of the Empire, though it's a good score. I mean, it's like, if you're like hankering for Star Wars-esque music, and he uses a lot of Williams themes, of course. Yeah. But he composes some of his own, too. So should we get into some of this game stuff?
So other news, in video game news, so we have some new. I'll stop saying the word news. So we have two video games have been announced. First is that Electronic Arts and Respawn Entertainment are going to make a new Star Wars game. Respawn is behind Titanfall, which I have not played, but I think even some of the people at Respawn who made Titanfall came from some other company, and they made some famous game. So the only thing we know about it at this point is that it's, quote, a third-person action adventure set in the Star Wars universe. And I'm kind of wondering if we're going to get a video game tied to this Han Solo movie, because it seems like that might be more of a natural tie-in than maybe Rogue One, where like the tie-in for Rogue One is essentially like the same thing as a tie-in for A New Hope.
Right.
In some ways, not all. They could surprise us, but we certainly haven't heard of anything coming down the line for Rogue One in terms of like a video game tie-in. But I do wonder if we're going to get like a Han Solo game, which I don't think we've ever gotten. A Han.
No,
Solo.
There's never been a
because you alluded to Shadows of the Empire, and that was basically like a Han Solo substitute.
Right, your Dash Rendar, who is, I forget that the old not continuum, but the old timeline, that they would sometimes do substitutes for video games. So it's like Kyle Katarn is in the Jedi Knight games and whatnot. Respawn, Titanfall was a decent game with some problems. It completely lacked a first person experience, so it was necessitated you being online to actually enjoy it. It didn't have a story but the tech of it was pretty solid. It's basically it's always funny when you describe games, probably to people that don't play games, that it's a great chance to get your eyes rolling. It is a combination of like Japanese style like mech robots and parkour. And it's like you're either like in a Call of Duty situation where you're a dude and you're jumping and climbing walls, blah blah blah, and then when you've killed enough people or garnered enough points, then you can go and say, all right, bring me my mech, and then they drop this robot down, and then you can fight in the robot, and it's got nuclear missiles and stuff. It's very chaotic, and it's very fun, but unfortunately it ticked people off because it didn't have that first person experience, and it still sells pretty consistently. It's like, it's been out something. If you go online and try to play it, there's nobody there to play it. So it's, but anyway, that doesn't mean anything. But if they were going to go for some kind of, battle thing, which I don't think they will, I don't know. Titanfall 2 has already been announced, but I forget whether Respawn is actually involved in that. They probably not if they're doing this. I mean, they can't just redo a battle thing because it would be too much like Battlefront. So yeah, it'll be interesting, like a third person kind of maybe if it was a Han Solo game, maybe they could take something from this, like Naughty Dog just released the fourth Uncharted, which is kind of like a contemporary Indiana Jones game. Kind of like it kind of cribs a little bit from Tomb Raider and Indiana Jones. That whole, it's like, and it got really good reviews. So I mean, if you were going to do something like that, you could kind of think of it in that, like, oh, Han Solo, lands on a planet and has to find some, I don't know, treasure or something. Right.
You could think of a host of different levels or missions that you could drop Han Solo into, I suppose. I mean, that's a total guess on my part. It could be that it's not affiliated with that at all. But just the phrase action adventure, rather than like, oh, it's a space battle or whatever.
Or an RPG, which I think a lot of people are, people would love. I mean, the thing is like there's this weird kind of thing in the game industry right now because, the game industry is literally bigger than the movie industry. And most of the money is made on very, like small, like not small games, but games that aren't particularly ambitious. It's like the biggest games in the world that are being played right now are like Dota 2 and, what's the League of Legends, which these are games that a person with a very simple computer could play generally for free. And then they make all their money on these microtransactions. So what's that left the industry in this kind of weird idea that you don't find a lot of extreme support for these, what they would call like Battlefront, the Star Wars battle simulation game. They would call that's considered a AAA game. That's the term. And so part of the problem that we haven't had a lot of AAA games for Star Wars is because, LucasArts was kind of awash in this kind of like, do we make small games? Do we make big games? And then, and then what happened is Disney bought Lucasfilm, and then in some kind of weird, and I'm getting to a point here. Sorry,
I'm sure you are.
Sorry, listeners. Well, but all of a sudden when I start talking, I realized there was some kind of news about this. So what happened is Disney has Star Wars. And then Disney Interactive, who make the games, go, oh, that's all right. We don't want to make any Star Wars games. So they basically sell the license to EA. And now Disney Interactive is having a major problem because their little game, which is called Disney Infinity, which is those figures that you buy.
Right. You buy their kind of stylized representations of different Disney characters, and then you like put them on a little pedestal or you connect them up to your console or whatever, and then you play the game that way.
Yeah, and now that's being shut down. But I don't think that affects the Star Wars. I think that's in something else, isn't it?
Well, so there are Star Wars Disney Infinity games, and so they're going to stop making those as well.
Okay.
And from what I read, it seemed like, in fact, the Star Wars side of it was basically keeping that franchise afloat in some ways that a lot of the profits or a lot of the income from that game were driven by the Star Wars side of things. So yeah, I mean, it definitely suggests maybe that they are switching to a different model now, where it's more about the licensing. I mean, and for Star Wars, it was a lot of licensing. It was a lot of licensing driven stuff to begin with, but now that they're part of Disney, Disney seems to be kind of moving in that direction.
That's the funny thing. It's like, you'd think that, like, why are they having so much trouble getting these Star Wars games out? It's a license to print money, but the downside is that creating a AAA game takes years and years. I mean, Battlefront took approximately 3 years to make, and that's also, and if you want to include the failed sequel, which was a different company, it took 10 years to make, because they'd almost had a complete game that they pulled. And there was a thing came out today about an RTS or as a turn-based strategy game that had leaked online. I mean, and they had a bunch of, like, when Xbox Arcade was a thing for the last iteration of the Xbox, that they were going to come out with a shooter for that. And so all these things, they get canceled because it's like, if we do that game, the Uprising or
I was going to say, I haven't heard
Heroes.
a word about Uprising or that Galaxy of Heroes game.
Yeah, I mean, they tried to make so much about those things, but really, when you're playing on an iPad, you really can, it's like, go here, kill your enemy, collect, go back. I mean, that's as much finesse as you can have in those things. It's not, even a game like Battlefront has a little bit more to do in that, it's more fun because it's like, was it 40 people, 20 on 20 type games. And speaking of Battlefront, I guess they kind of they don't let it slip. It's kind of interesting how, like, really the best place to get these kind of news drops are from, like, stockholder meetings.
Yeah.
It's like, it's so unsexy to be like, attention stockholders, we're going to have a Battlefront 2, and there'll be a bunch of old dudes going, what's a Battlefront?
Yeah.
What is that going to affect?
How much money did it make last time? Good.
Yeah, what's the index on that? So Battlefront 2 is...
We're getting a Battlefront 2.
Which, was a foregone conclusion.
So it's and I'm jumping in here because I want to lead off with a question for you.
Yeah.
So in the announcement, they basically only said, like, it'll be full of new and bigger and better worlds, essentially, and suggested that, like, well, there's some characters that we don't have in the current Battlefront that we will see in Battlefront 2. So, as someone who, I still have my, like, Nintendo 64 or whatever that I play, but I'm not really up on what contemporary video game playing is like.
Right.
Why announce that you're making Battlefront 2 rather than just keep continuing with these updates and expansion packs for Battlefront 1, right? So in the article, the author of the article, not the person affiliated with whoever makes Battlefront, but the author of the article suggests, well, we'll get episode 8, we have Rogue One, in Battlefront, you don't have any characters, Finn and Poe and Rey are not in there, so maybe in Battlefront 2 you'll get to play with those characters. So why not just add those to Battlefront, 18 months down the line or 12 months down the line or 10 months down the line and say, oh, well, you can be Finn at the Battle of Endor or whatever. Rather than, so why not do that, and why create, like, a whole new game and call it Battlefront 2?
That's a good question. I mean, basically, I think it comes right down to money and marketing.
Okay, that was my feeling too. I just didn't know,
because I mean, being a person that I was so excited about Battlefront, thinking it was going to be a little bit more than it was, and then being disappointed, and then being like, kind of like, the 5 stages of grief about this game. It not quite being, it's not very deep. There's not a lot of maps. Yeah, traditionally EA and DICE and stuff, a lot of their, what they're taking from is the model of the Battlefront model. the Battlefront model is that, you release the Battlefield,
Right.
which is
Right.
another franchise that I play, and it's kind of known as, quote, the realistic battle thing, even though it's obviously everybody's jumping off of buildings with parachutes and things like that. But that game has been out for 2-3 years, and I bought a season pass for it, and it's like I paid $60 for the game, and then I paid $40 for the season pass. So it's like it's a $100 thing all told. But you're still getting content. There's a community, there's points, there's weekends. It's like there's actually reasons, if you're still enjoying the game, they we took all your favorite maps and now we changed them, and now you can have you can do a battle at night. Which, in and of itself sounds kind of ridiculous, but it's fun. It adds a new challenge, kind of thing. The problem with, Battlefront is that, they put so little into the actual on the disc game that it's embarrassing for them to turn around and ask for you to spend another $50 to get the other half of the game. And so now they've only released, 4 additional maps. And it's like, I haven't even bought that yet because I keep waiting for a deal, because $50, it's like, for $50 right now I could go buy that new Uncharted game I was talking about. That's like getting, 94% on Metacritic. And they say it's a great game. And it's like, it's people have said that it's pushing the boundaries of how good a console game could look. Or I can drop $50 and get one map, 4 extra maps of Jabba's palace, and then in the future, maybe by the time 2016 rolls around, I'll be getting my last map just in time for the hype for the Battlefront 2, which I'm going to have to spend another $60 and then another $50 for a season pass. It's that, it's just money, and it's in a lot of ways it's just disgusting, because they're basically saying to your face right there that, like, yeah, you're going to, every time you buy,
you're going to pay for this.
You're going to pay $110 for a game every time you pay it, and you're only going to get a year out of it. Okay. Now Battlefront came out in November of 2015. So, okay, it's going to be more than a calendar year. But, then they'll start slowly picking away at one of the big things about online games is how many servers are being hosted by EA.
Right.
To things that all of a sudden it's going to be harder to get into a game, and then it's going to be, you might have to wait. Or then they do this thing on Battlefield, which I think is kind of sleazy, but it's, it's just the way where you literally rent server space from EA. And then you can create your own rules, and it gets ridiculous because, like, when games start to die, their online components start to die off. Then you get all these weird people like, no punching. You'll be banned if you punch somebody, and it's like, what? They have arbitrary rules like no cursing on your headset or something. And then for the ancillary of that is the Rockstar, the Grand Theft Auto way of doing stuff, is that Grand Theft Auto has a first person aspect of their game, and then they have an online, and the online literally never costs you any money unless you want to add little things. And even if you don't want to add them, it's like in-game currency or whatever. They've been, that game has been around for 3 years now. It's still in the top 3 selling games every month, because a kid can go and play. It takes, maybe 35, 40 hours to play the main game. Then you jump into the online and you can play it infinitely. They have these things called jobs, and they're just quests, let's race my car. And the whole way that the EA has been doing this, it actually made me think to myself, I had actually been kind of like, oh, if I have a little bit of extra money, maybe I'll treat myself to this season pass. Now, I will say you can buy these season passes individually. They're $15. So I don't have to spend the $50 right off the bat. I could just buy one, and I could buy them piecemeal over time. But it makes me think, why even bother? They're going to be, maybe come December, some of the Rogue One people will show up in this version of the game, but we're never going to get, they're never going to do an expansion, as they call them, for The Force Awakens. This engine will be, in a year, by the time I get that, they'll already be thinking about the other thing, and I won't even probably be playing the game. I'll be excited about the next one. So, I mean, I'm taking a long time to say that, yeah, this pisses me off a lot. It feels like a waste of money. It actually makes me less excited about the future of this game. That they're kind of going, instead of the Battlefield way of doing things, they're doing the Call of Duty, which is, let's have a new game out every year that you have to go and buy.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I wonder too if a part of it. So someone else I follow on my personal Twitter account was, I don't even know why he was talking. I mean, he talks about Star Wars sometimes, but he was talking about Battlefront the other day, and he said the thing about Battlefront is that, or to him, the thing about it was the first few weeks were really fun, and then after that, you lost what he called sort of like the middle class left, and so the people who were still playing after the first couple of weeks were all of the really, really good players, and then the players who were not good at all. And so you had this big imbalance, and I don't know how much that was true. I mean, you could speak to that more than I could.
Oh, absolutely. Whoever said that is right on the money.
Right. But so people who buy that game get a sense of that, or people who read about the game get a sense of that. And so I wonder if it becomes this perpetuating thing where, like you said, they'll just release a Battlefield 2 or 3 or 4 because, Battlefront, Battlefront 2 they'll release and everyone will go, oh, wow, Battlefront 2, I have to play it. And then after 2 weeks, it's the same thing. It's just either the really good people or the really bad people. And then it interest tails off. And so they need to keep releasing new games to spike interest back up rather, because they don't get that same effect if they just update the existing game. Because people say, well, yeah, they have a new map, but I remember I enjoyed what I played, but it's only going to be the really bad people and the really good people anyway.
Yeah, they have to it's almost like they have to start a whole fresh PR run for these games.
Right. I mean, because people sort of associate now Battlefront with, oh, well, yeah, it was fun for a little while and then not as much.
I mean, the thing is that there's always been this push in the gaming community, which I am not part of. So, but I read up on stuff, and there's always this kind of idea that the number one thing they say is stop pre-ordering games. Because this is how these companies are able to kind of put the screws to you by going hey, we know that, we're going to sell 1 million copies of this game. Even if now we're saying, oh, you only get 5, you're only getting 4 maps or something like that. It's the idea that you need to keep them you need to kind of keep the companies in a suspense as to whether or not they're going to be able to sell their game. And then that way they try to up the stakes. If you pre-order now, you'll get, you're going to get this map. You're going to get that. I guess my point is that Battlefront, the Star Wars game, has sold incredibly well, and it actually beat expectations from EA. Mm-hmm. It was slow originally, and some people go, "Oh, it didn't sell as well." That turned out not to be true. It has sold, record amounts. They sell lots of PlayStations, blah blah blah, specifically for people that want to play this game. Yeah. So there's no way that they're going to take any of what I'm saying to heart. They don't care because it's it's like the idea of saying you should sell me this loaf of bread, for $1 instead of $2 because, I don't think it's fair that I'm just going to have to come back and buy bread again or something. They go, no, we know that the market can bear a $60 game and a $50 season pass every calendar year or every 18 months or whatever, because it's they tend to release date slip. So I guess my point is they if you want to play this, you have to play it the way they want to do it. You, as a consumer, you have no power.
Yeah.
And
I'll note too, I just saw apparently there's going to be a free trial this weekend of the Outer Rim Star Wars Battlefront Outer Rim. There's going to be a free trial this weekend.
Oh, that's...
Which I imagine is sort of a way for them to, get people interested. And then they're like, oh, yeah, that was fun. I'll, maybe I'll get the next update, or, I'll buy the next expansion or
yeah. And I mean, I didn't know about that. And so I will.
It just showed up on my Twitter timeline.
Yeah, I'll be trying that out because it's like I have not even had a chance to do. It's just one of those things. I try to be a frugal consumer when it comes to games because if you're willing to wait, you can save a lot of money. It's that's kind of where I'm at when it comes to games, because it's like I realize I don't have as much time mentally to dedicate to games as some people. So I want to get my money's worth. And I was, like I said, I think I said this last week, the May the 4th, when I was looking at all the deals, there were some good deals, but the only thing that wasn't, you could get Battlefront for $29.99, but everybody would say on Twitter, yeah, I just paid $29.99, but if I want this other stuff, I'm going to have to pay, the 15 or the $50 to get the whole season pass. Why haven't they done a discount on that? And that being said, that I guess if you're an Xbox One user, they just did a thing where they made the Force Unleashed game 1 and 2 games backwards compatible, so you can play those. They were half price, but I actually didn't. I had $5 in PlayStation credit, and I bought the Super Star Wars Super NES game for the PS4, which was fun. That's why I keep my Super NES game, is for those fun Star Wars games. So it's not all bad news.
Yeah,
I feel like this angry old fart just complaining about the realities. It's like, this is how much.
No, but I mean, the economics of these things have changed so much.
Yes,
and they're not really not that these kinds of things are ever like super beneficial to the consumer, but it seems like it's more of like a slow bleed rather than okay, I'll pay for this game, and once having purchased this game, I now own this game.
Yes.
Yeah.
So tread lightly on how much people want to get into video games, because it can if you're cheap like me, it can really tick you off. So what should we talk about next?
Do you want to talk about your Elstree 1976 review, or do you want to talk about the...
I'll just do it briefly, because really it's just you can go read.
Again, the full review is at talkingbirdcast.com.
Yeah.
Elstree 1976, it's a documentary about the extras and the sort of minor characters that appeared in the original trilogy, I think. And so you had a really interesting view of it, I thought.
Yeah, I got it I rented it on Amazon Instant, and I read some reviews that had kind of said, it's pretty good for the first 20 minutes, but then it kind of drops off. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. And I said, I'll give it a chance. I actually found it fascinating, but to be honest, these are, except for the participation of Dave Prowse and Jeremy Bullock, these, and Angus McInnes, who doesn't actually, he has a speaking role in A New Hope. It is about people that were very, very minor characters. We're talking like a guy that held a flag. We're talking about the gentleman that was wearing the Stormtrooper armor when they were coming in the control room of the Death Star, and he hits his head, which is pretty iconic for Star Wars, but really it was a blooper. We have the guy that wore the mask for Greedo. We have a woman that had played one of the Cantina bar patrons. And it's basically, it's an interesting thing. It starts out, in my review, I said it's very melancholy. There is a kind of sadness to it. They don't identify the people right away. It's just a kind of a mishmash of voices and people saying, they would introduce the people with a shot of their Hasbro era figures, because that was the era when basically everybody got a figure. But a couple of people are like, yeah, the figure doesn't look like me, or it was just a job, and these kind of things. And then you get to kind of get introduced to these different characters and these different actors. And a lot of times they're not necessarily real actors. Like they were like, the one woman was just like, she was like, I used to dance on this show, and then as I got older, I realized I had a young family to support, and so I would take these gigs, and I got along with everybody because I had no I had no interest in being an actress. I'm basically, she was an attractive woman who was just kind of there to be like, oh, we need someone to walk from one room to the next holding a piece of paper in Superman, the motion picture. She'd do stuff like that. Other people, a lot of people were Canadians that took advantage of the Commonwealth immigration rules, which I don't think apply anymore. Where Canadian citizens, they were still considered subjects of the Queen of England, and I don't know how that is anymore. But you could easily immigrate to England and vice versa with very little paperwork. So a lot of like Canadian actors, like Garrick Hagon, who played Biggs Darklighter, he would go. He came over and would work there. This Angus. Angus McInnes, who had been in a lot of small roles, had benefited from that. It was at first I was like, oh great, they don't have the rights to use any of the imagery from Star Wars, so we're never going to be able to they're going to have to sit there and explain where they are. But luckily, as the movie rolls on, they are able to show little clips, and basically, except for some of the people that were stormtroopers, they're never able to kind of show them wearing the costume without the helmet. So they explain where they are, and they basically talk about their careers leading up to that. A lot of it is like young people just like striking it out on their own. Either they're like, I wanted to be a musician. It was a lot of weird kind of serendipity. Like one guy that, and I don't have his name handy. He actually went on to play Fixer, he's actually more famous as being deleted from the movie than actually being in the movie. He plays one of Luke's friends that hang out kind of at the gas station that in this deleted Anchorhead scenes. One of the things that it was like I said, a lot of it is like, except for this Angus McInnes, who is he's very, very frank in his kind of assessment. He actually, I don't know if he thought Star Wars was going to be a hit, but he definitely thought it was special because I guess he's kind of a closet sci-fi fan and he really liked it. But a lot of the real interesting stuff comes from the, this interview with like Dave Prowse, who's always been kind of typically angry about, not regretful in his participation, but kind of angry in his subsequent portrayal in the grand mythos of Star Wars, and the idea that he's not as respected as, like, say, a Carrie Fisher or an Anthony Daniels. That his contribution, since a lot of his contribution is a composite where he would, he delivered dialogue and then it would be dubbed by James Earl Jones, or if there was a stunt, it was another actor would put that on the stunt costume and do the sword fighting because he doesn't know how to sword fight. And he's kind of, I think he's felt a little bit squeezed out of it, to the point where he actually talks about the fact that he's been banned from all official Lucasfilm events, but never quite goes into it.
Yeah.
A lot of it is, the controlling of a corp. You work for a corporation, you end up having to deal with corporations. Right. One of the things that I took away from it, and I refer to my review, is this idea of the hierarchy of kind of convention guests. Mm-hmm. That there was, especially Angus McInnes, who was very vocal about him being angry about, some guy who was just sitting he's sitting in the, you see him face on in the briefing scene. He has he's the guy, like, the loosen up guy. He's angry that, like, some guy that, like, basically just sat in a chair and then gets up is being able to, like, sell his autograph for $20. And he's like, I've seen guys show up that they say that they click, what is it? The clapper, the thing that they do for audio visual sync in movies when they snap before a take. Like that guy, those guys are trying to say. He was pretty angry. He kind of, in not so many words, felt like that they were kind of taking money out of his mouth.
I thought that part was really interesting. And I mean, I have to imagine, not to, like, dump on these guys, but, if you ask Carrie Fisher...
Did you watch it?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Okay,
I've read your review.
Okay, though, sorry.
So I'm talking about that part of your review that interested me the most. Like, if you ask Carrie Fisher about, like you said, some extra who like got up and moved a piece of paper from one side of the set to the other, or the woman who played oh god, why am I blanking on her name in Echo Base and Empire Strikes Back?
I don't know her name either.
The woman's name in the communication station. Her character has a name, and we've mentioned it on the show before.
I forget it.
Doesn't
matter.
Yeah, like if you asked her about like how do you feel about that actress, making $20 per autograph at conventions, Carrie Fisher probably wouldn't give a shit. Right? Like, sorry, I rarely curse on here, but Carrie Fisher wouldn't care. She'd be like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. But if you are sort of competing with that person for, maybe I want autograph money, or if you view what you do as like, well, this is a career, and I took this role as like a small thing, but hopefully so that the director would be like, yeah, you were pretty good. Maybe I'll put you in the next thing as like an extra or a small role, and so then if you see someone who essentially has the same or a similar role as you do in the film, kind of using it for personal gain and whatever, then yeah, I could see how that would rankle a little bit. Torin Farr is her name.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I understand it, and I'm not going to argue with a person's perception. I mean, a lot of these, generally, these are people that have not had incredibly fruitful acting careers. Although I keep referring to this, Angus MacInnes, when they kind of made it seem like, oh, I did a few things, and I was in Judge Dredd. He's actually been in a lot of stuff. He was in Hellboy. He was in... Mm-hmm. He was in Strange Brew, the Bob and Doug McKenzie movie, and he was had a major role in it, which is a cult film that I've enjoyed over the years. And I was like, God, he looks really familiar. And I realized he plays Rosie or something who interacts with the Bob and Doug and the female lead of the thing. So it's like, mm-hmm. I think it's just a lot of an idea of like, if you have enough. For some people, if you have enough ego to say, hey, I want to go and I want to pretend to be somebody for a living, mm-hmm. that impulse doesn't go away. It's like, the woman that was just kind of doing it because she had a daughter that she wanted to raise, or, the guy that wanted to do wanted to have a musical career and just needed some bills. That wasn't as a big of deal for them, but yeah, for people that like want to be actors and then to have to like, not have it turn out the way you want, but still finding able to like, hey, I can make a couple $100 sitting in this chair. I mean, I'm not going to say it's sad because it's kind of like I've gone to those things myself. I'm not an autograph collector at all, so I've never really, I've gone to Comic Cons and seen like Margot Kidder trying to like, drag her suitcase full of 8x10s and stuff like that after a kind of a frustrating slow convention, and being like, geez, it's a hard way to make a buck, but it's also it's only really hard on the ego. Physically, you're just sitting in a chair.
Yeah, so definitely check out Robert's review of Elstree 1976 at talkingbirdcast.com, and if that sounds interesting. I am actually a little interested to see the documentary now. I mean, you were just talking about how, most fans who want to learn about acting, why would they want to hear from the guy who played Biggs or whatever? But, I do enjoy that kind of like process oriented behind the scenes stuff. So, I think I might look into that. And it's a good review. It's really interesting. I learned a bit about the film that intrigued me. So
cool.
Yeah.
Let's talk some comics.
Let's talk comics.
So Poe Dameron number dos.
Poe Dameron number 2. This came out last week, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. So Poe Dameron, when last we left him, had been sent on a mission to find Lor San Tekka. He managed to arrive at some rocky planet where he encountered a group of essentially like doomsday worshippers, kind of. Right, so they have this big orb they call an egg, and they're waiting for the egg to this group has been charged with protecting the egg until it hatches. And so he meets up with them. They think he's trying to like destroy the egg or whatever. So he finally convinced them that maybe he's okay, or at least that he doesn't care about their egg and that he just wants to leave. And then right at the end of issue 1, the Empire shows up, or I guess the First Order shows up to chase after him. And so in issue 2, there's a little more interaction between Poe and the egg people, and his squadron that we met in issue 1. The other X-Wing pilots, start to rescue him. But I think the biggest point from this issue is that we meet Agent Terex, who I keep wanting to call Agent Telex, which tells you how old I am.
Yeah, exactly.
They keep wanting to say Agent Telex, but Agent Terex, who is, I guess, the face of this effort to stop Poe Dameron from finding Lor San Tekka, or just stopping Poe Dameron in general. And so that's kind of it's not really a reveal, but that's, I think, what gives focus to this issue, and that's, I think, what a lot of fans are going to take away from it.
Yeah.
So a couple interesting things that I thought about Agent Terex. First is his ship is called the Carry-On Spike, which in the novel Tarkin, which just squeaked over the line and is now officially new canon. The Carry-On Spike was Tarkin's ship in the events of that novel, but it got stolen by this group of not really rebels, but sort of dissatisfied former Imperial workers who, they were rebelling against Tarkin more than anything else. But, so they steal his ship, the Carry-On Spike, and then it gets abandoned. At the end of the novel, it's just kind of floating around somewhere. So apparently either that same ship has been found and spruced up and kept running, or it was junked and they just created a new ship, and out of homage to Tarkin or whatever, it was called the Carry-On Spike. So that's sort of one interesting connection there. The other thing that I thought was interesting about Agent Terex is that he struck me as a much more a kind of leader, or a kind of military figure that really reminded me more of the EU, of the way that they portrayed Imperial commanders and admirals and generals and what have you. I mean, of course, after post Grand Admiral Thrawn, kind of every any Imperial figure who wasn't just a stormtrooper, they kind of had to give some kind of gimmick to, or pretension or hobby, right? So like this one collects jazz records, excuse me, jizz records.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the only reason I said it, is to get that reaction. So this one listens to music. That one has a drinking problem. This one is maybe gay. Whatever it is.
Right.
Or they kind of have these outsized personalities that make them memorable in some sense. That they're not just like, all right, yeah, you're just some faceless like Imperial commander, whatever. Whereas what we've seen of the First Order up to this point has really only been in The Force Awakens, and you don't really get the sense from Hux that he's, he seems like he's carved from a different mold, right? He's colder. He's much more focused on, restoring the glory of the old Empire and the glory of the First Order, destroy the New Republic. He's younger. He's more ambitious. He's not the kind of, battalion, what do they call him? Like garrison commander or garrison, planet governor who,
right.
He imposes discipline, but not that much. He kind of lets things slide a little bit as long as he gets, his art, or whatever. So I guess there's in one of the short stories, that was in that Rise of the Empire novel, I guess there was a similar character. I can't remember her name now, but she like collected armor from all over the galaxy, and that was kind of her gimmick. And so maybe it's not EU, but it's just sort of the way they're portraying the people from the Empire versus the leaders in the First Order. This Terex seems much more like that Imperial style leader, because he has somewhat of a flamboyant personality, right? He has that mustache.
Yeah, he looks
flamboyant in the sense of like showy, and you know, he has a penchant for fine alcohol. He has slaves around that you get a sense in this issue that like maybe he's the only one that is keeping slaves these days. And I think he explicitly references, well, this was how it worked in the Empire, and no one cared then, so I think it's fine. Which is, and so I thought that contrast that was made a little bit explicit in this issue, but certainly implicit when you compare him to sort of other folks that we've seen. This contrast between the way that the Empire operated and the way that the First Order is sort of operating now. I thought that was kind of interesting. But so, what did you think of that character?
So I'll be honest, he's the only part I like about this comic.
Yeah,
I could the whole Poe Dameron stuff, the like him just sitting crouched in a cave the entire time because he's hiding from the First Order.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, and then they cut to all of his squadron, which they just don't do anything for me. They're just kind of like whatever.
Right.
The bad guy.
It's kind of neat to see the X-wings, in action. It evokes memories of like old Rogue Squadron stuff, but like the end, it's much more limited.
Except for the depictions, except for the early. I will give credit where credit is due. The early panels which hey man, jetpacks. Awesome.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah. The First Order stormtroopers.
Don't ever want to see him in a movie. But that's a total like classic Marvel like the 77 to 85 run kind of.
Yeah. Let's give him jetpacks.
Let's give him jetpacks. Let's have a guy that looks like a coked out Walt Disney.
Yeah.
And like put him on a speeder bike. And actually, the art is really good on this. Although I think as the issue crawls on and we start getting back into some of the stuff with Poe Dameron and the squadron, we're getting back to the idea that there's no depth of field or anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
But this Mr. Telex or whatever his name is,
Agent Terex.
Terex. Yeah, no, I was reading this and I was just like laughing because of how some of the dialogue. God, there was one line that I just. Well, it's not even his line, but it's this idea that he comes from that tradition of kind of EU characters they're dicks basically. Mm-hmm. They like being in the Empire because it gives them a license to be a dick, and they I like the finer things, and it's like
right. And
just the dialogue is so great when they come up to the egg and the elder says, "How dare you blast your way into the sacred chamber? That
mm-hmm.
door was sealed for a reason. You must leave, interloper, before your presence pollutes the sacred energies of this chamber. Do not force us to destroy you." And then he goes, right. My, look at all these guns. I mean, it's just like, it's so funny. I mean, I kind of love it because it's so ridiculous. It feels like something that the Archie Goodwin era or whatever would have done in the thing, and it unfortunately the landing doesn't get stuck with, because it actually makes Poe Dameron mm-hmm. and his cohorts seem pretty effing bland in comparison. It's like, they should have made it, maybe they should have cranked that up, the Poe Dameron aspect of his kind of roguish wit or something, but I don't know. It's just, there's something about this character. It's like, I don't usually root for the bad guys on these things. I'm actually kind of a very orthodox when it comes to Star Wars. I prefer the good. I always like the good guys more. Mm-hmm. But him hanging out with his kitty cat, space prostitutes, and his like display case.
Yeah, with his tattoo on his forehead.
Yeah, he's got a tattoo on his forehead. He's kind of like, he's not so much like coked out Walt Disney. He's like the coked out most interesting man in the world guy from the Dos Equis ads.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like these guys, like he's probably in his late, well, if it's 30 years, he's probably in his late 50s, and he's like, mm-hmm. his hair's thinning, so he just cuts it into a mohawk so he still can have a young look about it. And he's got a tattoo, and he's cool, and he kind of almost seems to know what's going on before. And then it's like, he's back and forth with Captain Phasma on his ship, and it's like, this is the kind of stuff I want. You know, when I pick up a comic, this is what I want, because I want it to be fun. I want it to, you know, I like it when a comic book ties in, you know, takes into account that people have been reading comic books for, 70 years. And that sometimes you can dip into these old, I mean, I might be overstating my point here, but it's one of the few times when it starts to go, oh, now I kind of understand the art form of comics. When it's got one foot in the past and one foot in the present. And, aside from the fact that the story itself is kind of, in a perfect world, the way we do these, it would end on, page 22 would be, either you would get almost an encapsulated story. But the flamethrowers were in the movie, but the jetpacks, I just love it. Yeah. I just love it, how ridiculous it is.
Yeah. And his helmet too, I kind of like his outfit that he's wearing while he's on that speeder bike. And then when he, before they break into the chamber where the egg is, like his helmet, it's very kind of sort of like 70s, 80s design. Like I with these kind of snow.
Oh yeah. Like Michael,
and he's got jodhpurs on, and his must. It's great.
I know if they had made this into a TV show, that Michael Ansara would have played him, because it's like, And then if you even look when he's chilling in his crib, he's wearing he's obviously shopping in the Calrissian collection at JCPenney's. He's got the same. He's got that
kind of like loose shirt and boots on.
He's not wearing a cape because it's 30 years past when capes were in style, but he's still got it. This is like I said, this kind of reminds me of a character from like an 80s Buck Rogers episode or something like that. It'd be like, Terex, I will be here. Would you like some spiced brandy?
Yeah. I also like, I think and I'm kind of with you that I think he is sort of the most interesting or most compelling character in these comics so far. And maybe that was always supposed to be the case, even when they conceived of this Poe Dameron title. But, he mentions that he started out as a stormtrooper. And so the fact that he's kind of worked his way up to whatever, it's unclear how much power and authority he has. I mean, he has his own ship, and he has ostensibly Tarkin's old ship, but at the same time, Captain Phasma is the one kind of giving him his mission.
Right.
He's like, okay, you have to go find Poe Dameron. Right. So that's sort of an interesting story that he worked his way up from being a stormtrooper to where he is now. And like picture this guy as a stormtrooper and what was expected of him as a stormtrooper. Right? It's sort of new. And at the same time, I don't know that we've ever had that story within Star Wars before on the Imperial side. I don't know that there was ever a story about like a stormtrooper who then worked their way up to being.
No, not really.
Even a captain or something like that.
The only person that I ever thought about, there was Admiral Dalla in the old thing where about she had kind of worked her way up through it, and
that's true.
Oppositions to women in the Empire, but no, really, there's not like they've always kind of been cagey about like are stormtroopers clones? Are they conditioned? Obviously, he's from that time where they always like the classic trilogy. Stormtroopers they're more of like
they're conscripts or whatever.
Yeah, they're conscripts, or they're like people's nephews looking for a job and stuff like that.
Right.
They're not battle hardened clones, and they're not first order conditioned bloodthirsty killers. They're kind of like that's why they were such bad shots, I guess, is what they're trying to explain.
Yeah, I guess is it maybe in Twilight Company that they have the point of view of one stormtrooper. I can't remember her name now, but one of her fellow stormtroopers is basically exactly that. Like he got the job because he's someone's nephew.
Yeah.
And is, just kind of biding his time until he's going to be promoted.
Oh, so have they kind of retcon, I didn't read Twilight Company. Have they retconned now that basically that women were stormtroopers even back in the classic trilogy? Because isn't Twilight Company? Does that take place?
Yeah,
after Endor?
I can't remember. They must have.
But I know that in the game itself that you can play as a female stormtrooper. I didn't know if they had decided to kind of.
Twilight? Is it Twilight? Yeah, it must be Twilight Company.
They've decided
they're on Sullust.
Yeah, I mean that's it. That's kind of. I didn't even think about that because I haven't read that book yet. But it's like, that's kind of an interesting development.
Yeah. The other thing I have to say about this comic is the writing, which you touched on, and there are some kind of fun, so when they break into the chamber where the egg is, and the leader of this, Doomsday group is like, how, this Kresh has been alone for, I guess it's a Kresh. The Kresh has been alone in this cavern for years, safeguarding the Savior Unborn. As you saw, the entrance was sealed. And then Terex just says, "Oh, look at you. That's adorable." It's just sort of like, "Oh, you're so naive." So like that kind of stuff is fun. On the other hand, this comic does something which is sort of, I think, endemic in some ways to a lot of not all of it, because this didn't ever really come up in Bloodline, but I think in a lot of the Star Wars novels and comic books, the written stuff, where someone is delivering dialogue, but it's an encyclopedia entry, and so it doesn't sound like it's something that would not sound natural as dialogue at all. Like there's no reason, like at one point Poe Dameron is talking to, or it's not Poe Dameron, but it's the other X-Wing pilots are trying to figure out how to get into this little space, to shoot up all these X-Wings or whatever. And they go like, well, TIEs are more maneuverable than X-Wings. It's like, well, of course they all know that. So there is no reason for character A to speak that aloud to character B if they both share that knowledge. Or, when Terex arrives, he says, or I guess when he's talking to Poe Dameron, and Poe Dameron's like, "Oh, I have friends up there who, are taking care of all of your, TIE fighters that you landed on the planet." And Terex, this is verbatim dialogue. He says, quote, "I came here aboard the Ravenous, a Maxima A class heavy cruiser, which carries an extremely impressive complement of fighters and troops." Like, why does Poe Dameron care what class of heavy cruiser? Like, either just say, "I came here aboard the Ravenous," or like, "Oh, don't worry, I brought with me an extremely impressive complement of fighters." And right, there's no reason to say, "Oh, it's the Ravenous, a Maxima A class heavy cruiser," unless you're like, okay, this is the information that the Lucas film people worked out, we know that the Wikipedia folks, when they see a drawing of a new class of ship, they're going to ask what kind of ship it is. And so we have to have an answer for them. So rather than like go through that rigmarole, we're just going to put it in the dialogue. And that happens, as I've said, like all the time in Star Wars stuff.
Right. Even in the
the X-Wing novels is essentially like 60% that.
Well, even the Force Awakens, there's that exchange between the female stormtrooper and Kylo Ren where he's like, he explains that Rey is only just testing her power and that she'll become more powerful. And it's like, why are you telling this rank and file person? Is this like a friend of yours or something, Kylo Ren?
Right.
It was just an info dump, as they say. I would almost hope that they should think about maybe approaching that a little in a different. Maybe it's not such a big issue, but maybe they could have an asterisk, and at the last page or something, they could actually have like a little article, like this is what this ship is.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen that before. Oh, I think it might have been it when. Well, so I know there's one other, like I said, I've started reading other comics, and I can't remember which one it is now, but A-Force maybe, or someone else where. Just exactly that. Oh no, I guess Bitch Planet is doing this. Where, no, maybe it's not even them. I can't remember what comic I'm reading where they do this. Where they do exactly that. It's like they do a little character profile at the end of every issue. So like the issue ends, and then before they get to the letters, they do, here's what the sort of the back of the baseball card. Like here's a description of who this character is and what they do and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that stuff was always fun when I was a kid. It was like, you get like sometimes at the Topps trading cards, you could get like little bios. And I know that they're trying to be very careful about not painting themselves into proverbial corners when it comes to characters, because I think that they're trying to have this, this one canon for the comics, books, and video games. Everything's one canon, and it's just like. Another reason why I feel like it's a wasted effort.
Yeah,
because you're removing a lot of the fun out of it. You know, I'm totally cool with I'm one of those few people totally cool with the rebooting of the universe. I honestly thought even if they didn't make more movies, that they would have to do it anyway, just because the stories had all been told, and it was almost like maybe they should reboot this and have new books. So it's not like a thing where it's like, oh, I really want to. I don't really need I need them to keep an eye on it, but I also think it's not the be all end all.
And I don't necessarily need to know every last detail of like what they're keeping track of and how they're keeping everything together. Like, just as long as I know that, like, okay, they're making sure this is all consistent behind the scenes, like, great. I don't need to know, you know, a Maxima A class. I'd be great. Like, yeah. What I realize is kind of weird about that phenomenon in the books is that I don't even think the movies do it that much. And you mentioned the awkward dialogue of like, oh, she's only testing her powers now. And I think certainly the Star Wars films have some occasions of like awkward expository dialogue,
right?
Where they're like, okay, we need to tell the audience like what this character is thinking or doing because, you know, just in case it's not clear. But in terms of that kind of the not statistical information, but like, here's the name of this ship, here's the name of that ship, this is how many TIE fighters an Imperial Star Destroyer can hold compared to like a Victory class Star Destroyer compared to something other class Star Destroyer. Like, you know, there's nothing, I don't think, in any of the movies, even the prequels, that gets into that. And I don't even think maybe The Force Awakens might, but I don't think the original trilogy even calls those fighters X-Wings. Like, they just say, oh, get to your fighters or whatever.
Right.
You know, it's two fighters against a Star Destroyer. Right. They say Star Destroyer, but they never say X-Wings even. And I said, in The Force Awakens, they might talk about like Poe Dameron's X-Wing, but
they call the snow speeders just speeders.
Right.
Yeah, no, they don't.
And they never refer to like, oh, that's a Victory class Star Destroyer.
Yeah, they never go like, they say this, they mention, the Star Destroyer Avenger in Empire, but they don't really get into like
bulk cruisers rather than, Corellian or the Corellian ships, not
the big
like Corellian cruisers or what.
I'm talking about, not the big Corellian ship.
The medical frigate is like, okay, so that's a frigate, but that's all we know. They never say like, oh no, it's heading for the Zebulon B frigate that's serving, And so the fact that they don't ever do that in the movies, it makes it, to me anyway, it just makes it kind of stand out even more. And it's like, why is that information there?
Well, maybe that is, like I said, they do refer to the YT Corellian freighter in The Force Awakens. So maybe they did some research and they said, oh, people.
Well, that I feel like, I don't know.
Yeah, I honestly don't need it. It feels, like I said, it feels unnatural, and it's not really I don't think it informs the story in a realistic way. I mean, obviously it isn't realistic anyway, but it just it points out. To me, it makes it more acute that you're this is it's all just a bunch of greasy kid stuff, and you're just like, I was enjoying this. Don't try to overdo it.
Yeah.
So, do we want to do Vader 20, or do we want to wrap up?
Yeah, let's do Vader 20. Okay. I actually don't have that much to say about it, but so Vader 20 came out today. Sort of wrapping up, or I guess it's not quite wrapping up, but it's a way station in the Vader versus Silo story.
Yeah.
Where, so at the end of Vader 19, Thanoth said, Vader, we need to talk. I found Afra. And so the implication is that he knows about the connection between the two. Vader is called to meet with the Emperor. And so in this issue, we get the Emperor basically explaining to Vader why he was working with Silo and what that meant. And then Vader going to meet with Thanoth, and Thanoth telling Vader that he knows where Afra is and that he knows about the connection, but then also telling Vader why he's telling Vader in person about all of that stuff. And that's kind of issue 20. It's a very talky comic book.
Yeah, it's
very, very talky.
It it's Vader's getting his mid-year review from his boss.
Yeah.
He's kind of
a lot of backstory that I'm
like,
sure most readers of Darth Vader number 20 will already know.
Yeah, it's like, you're doing well, but you could do better, and I'm also looking, I can replace you at any moment.
Right.
And then, this Thanos guy gets his what do they call it? Separation, exit interview. And then he's toast. Yeah, it's the starting of a new story, and it's kind of like, I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where it's like, I'm not quite on board with this yet, but it's got the potential. The Afra thing is kind of, I still wonder why he's so obsessed with this Afra woman, but I think,
well, at this point, right, he says, okay, we either need to find her or like make sure that she's dead.
Right.
Because at this point, it's sort of a she knows too much situation, and so I'm curious now whether she'll end up, now that she's been teaming up with Leia and Sana, she really doesn't have many options, right? She can either go back to Vader and commit to Vader full time, knowing full well that he can kill her at any moment, or she can defect and kind of join up with the rebellion, because she can't kind of go off on her own, because again, she'll just be waiting for Vader to come find her and kill her. But if she joins the rebellion, she at least has some support and some backup. So I'm a little curious to see how where her story goes from here. But yeah, especially the last couple of issues where, since Afra's been in the Rebel prison, like, Afra is not in the Darth Vader comic. They sure spend a lot of time talking about her for someone who's not even in this comic right now.
I can't help but think about Dr. Afra. Yeah. What is she doing? What is she thinking about? Is she thinking about me?
And whether she'll ever return someday.
Yeah, I've picked on this comic a bit. Well, I can't remember which ones I pick on. I
feel like they go back and forth. We started out really liking Darth Vader and not liking the Star Wars title that much, and that flipped at a certain point. And yeah.
I'm at the point now where I think there should be two titles. There should be like a title, like a Force Awakens era title, and there should be a classic title, and Never the Twain Shall Meet. And I think, because I feel like a lot of the great ideas are being kind of spread thinly across a lot of different one-offs and issues. I understand that's marketing. They're trying to sell a lot of product, but it's like, I feel like it's like you're chasing the dragon or whatever. It's like trying to find a good, consistent story. It's like, and I hate those stupid Darth Vader droid things. I just don't care. And they have a little extra.
Sure. Oh yeah, I was going to ask you what you thought about the misadventures of 000 and BT.
Yeah, they become even less interesting every time they show up in something. I mean, the minute they showed up, he says, "Oh yeah, take my arms off." It's like, oh, and then there's going to be a situation where this guy's going to think, "Now I got your arms off," and then it's going to turn around, and he's going to die. I mean, you could see it coming from a mile away. It's not. Yeah, I understand.
I wonder if that was meant to be like a reference to the C-3PO. Right? Because they're basically evil C-3PO and R2-D2. Right. So like, oh, well, we had a comic about C-3PO losing his arm. Let's have a thing about 000 losing his arm.
Yeah, it was just kind of like, they're trying. Yeah. I don't really know what fan reaction, like the hard, like the people that are less complainy than I am about it, and I don't see a lot of people talking about this on Twitter, like, oh, we love 000 or whatever, and it's like, I just, you don't see a lot of cosplay or
yeah, I
custom
certainly
painted
on Twitter
figures.
You don't see a lot of like the runaway love for them that they may have been anticipating.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess in closing, I would say if you're thinking you want to buy a Star Wars comic this week, maybe go for Poe Dameron #2 and just enjoy some old school style storytelling with not necessarily, the greatest amount of Poe Dameron in it. And maybe skip the Vader.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing about the misadventures of 000 and BT. Like it mostly just confused me because issue 21 or issue 20 rather ends with Vader telling 000 and BT to find Dr. Aphra or kill her in the process, and it says continued in issue 21, and then you turn the page. And then suddenly it's BT and 000 and 000 is talking about like, well, Dr. Aphra sent us to get this. And you're like, wait a minute, were these pages printed out of order? Was this supposed to go earlier in the thing? Have they already found it? Like, I thought this wasn't picking up until the next. So for me, it was just like, wait a minute, did I miss something? Where was this supposed to go? And I think they were, given how they ended issue 20 to then immediately start back up with 000 talking about Aphra, like it was just like a weird editing issue that it was kind of disjointed to me.
Yeah. So I think we about time to wrap up. If you want to interact with us, best place right now is to go to talkingbirdcast.com. And like I said, you can read my full review of Elstree 1976. You can interact with us. I think we have a new email address. You can still use the talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. I'll get mail. But we also have hosts. So host with an S on it at talkingbirdcast.com. And then we will get any messages. We got links to different ways that you can get if you're a Stitcher person or an iTunes or whatever. It's just there for you to you can follow us on Twitter or just read it there. And also, there's the Amazon link, which is talkingbirdcast.com/Amazon, and that's just a great way to kind of passively support the show when you're already making a purchase on Amazon. If you use that code or URL, we get a little percentage kickback and helps pay for the show. And we thank you.
Does not increase the cost of your purchase.
No, it does not. And I would like to preemptively thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
We will be back next week, hopefully. Major events notwithstanding, with our review in depth. I think we're gonna, unless there's some crazy news happening, with a full episode review of Star Wars Bloodline, the Princess Leia solo novel, which like I said, little mini review. It's probably the novel that some people have been waiting for with these new books.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you again for listening and for Talking Birdcast. I have been Robert Zachary.
And I remain John Llewellyn.
And may the Force be with you. Thanks for listening.